These are just ordinary copper pieces, raw and faceless. But from them a nation's currency is molded, and when circulated, each commands a value greater than its own. Money, with which we buy goods and services. It's a medium of exchange between buyer and seller, a measure of wealth, an integral part of the economy. Money was first introduced to the Malay Peninsula through trade. In the early years, it came in all shapes and sizes. Later, there were the Spanish dollar, the merchant tokens, and the Japanese banana notes, so called because of the banana designs on them. We began using the Malayan dollar not long after the Second World War. This was issued by the Board of Commissioners of Currency of Malaya and British Borneo. It was a strong dollar, backed 100% by gold and foreign reserves. In 1959, a central bank was set up in Malaya, and there were plans for it to take over the duties of issuing and circulating currency. But then Singapore separated from Malaysia in 1965, and it was hoped that both countries would continue using the same currency.
The advantages of having a common currency is that you don't have to worry about foreign exchange, especially for traders and people who travel up and down Malaysia. There's no question of two different rates of exchange, and also that currency has been in existence for so long, people know it, so there is a continuity.
Singapore and Malaysia had always been seen as one economic unit, and it would definitely be easier if both countries traded in the same currency as in the past. But there were problems involved. The Singapore government preferred to stick to the existing system, in which all currency was issued by the Currency Board, while the Malaysian government wanted its central bank to play a greater role in monetary matters. For Singapore, the shock of separation was still being felt, and a drastic change in its monetary system would have affected the economy. Singapore relied heavily on trade, and economic stability was very important to its survival. The negotiations broke over one issue.
A question of control over the assets of the currency, the backing of the currency. Who controls it? For every dollar that was issued, there was an asset backing it. So the question was, now, how do we control this asset now that the two governments are separate? So the breakup was a question of control of the assets. On that, we broke.
It came as a shock when it was announced that both countries would issue separate currencies. In some quarters, there was concern.
Singapore had just separated from Malaysia in 1965, so the concern was whether she could be viable in an economic entity with its own currency. The shock of being a separate political entity was already bad enough, and now it had to be a separate currency entity as well. Singapore was just trying to find its own feet, and we were afraid that we might lose some international competitiveness by this currency split.
But there was no turning back. A currency board chaired by the finance minister was set up to issue the new currency. Like the old dollar, the new one was pegged at 0.290299 grams of gold, or 2 shillings 4 pence. And just like the old, it was backed 100% in gold and foreign assets. The new notes were issued on 12 June 1967. On that day, many went to the banks to change old notes for new ones. Because the old currency could still be used alongside the new, the transition was an easy one. We also signed an interchangeability agreement with both the Malaysian and Brunei governments, putting all three currencies at par. The coins arrived in November that year, freshly minted from London. But this was also the time when we ran into a currency crisis. London had devalued the sterling. The new Singapore dollar kept its gold parity, now worth an equivalent of 2 shillings 8 pence. But those holding on to the old Malayan dollar were anxious, as this meant that it was now only worth 85 cents of the new dollar. There was a long queue outside the currency board, as people rushed to get rid of their old notes, afraid that its value would drop even further. Only after the public was assured that there were enough new notes for all to change did the crisis end. Since then, as our industrialization program took off and our economy expanded, confidence in our dollar also grew. In 1973, following worldwide trends, we floated our currency. This meant that the value of our dollar would depend mainly on the forces of demand and supply. The interchangeability agreement with Malaysia also lapsed at that time. This meant that the two currencies would no longer be on par. There was yet another queue at Empress Place. Many gave up their Malaysian ringgits in their possession. It was a complete switch to using the Singapore dollar. This ended an age-old union completely.
The concern was whether, if the Malaysian ringgit fell below the Singapore dollar, which it did, whether this would disrupt trade between the two countries. Those who had activities or money in both countries, they had to come to a certain choice. But at that time, Singapore was doing quite well as a country, so we did benefit in a sense that many businesses and individuals chose to locate in Singapore.
It's a reflection of our economic strength that over the years, from the Orchid series to the Bird and Chip series, our currency has not only remained stable, but also increased in value.
The way to maintain currency value would be to have a strong economy and also a strong balance of payments. So on those two counts, Singapore has done quite well since 1973. She has succeeded in not only growing very fast, but also in attracting a lot of foreign capital. So her balance of payments is quite strong.
Today, the Currency Board still ensures that our dollar is 100% backed by gold and foreign assets, while the MAS keeps a close watch on our exchange rate. For Singapore, a sound economic policy has enabled our economy to expand over the years. Together with internal political stability, this has ensured confidence in our dollar. And now it is generally accepted as a medium of exchange throughout the countries of Southeast Asia.